But the messenger reported back that Leonardo seemed weary of the paintbrush. Only one painting, a religious commission, held Leonardo's interest. In 1501, he began a sketch of the Virgin sitting on the lap of her mother, St. Anne, and reaching down to the Christ child. With this painting, Leonardo won the unqualified admiration of the Florence art world, which had so ignored him in his earlier days. But once again, although he worked on it for 8 or 9 years, Leonardo did not finish the work. Once again, his mind was elsewhere. What was consuming Leonardo's interest more and more was the flight of birds. He spent hours observing them.
The bird is an instrument functioning according to mathematical laws, and man has the power to reproduce an instrument like this with all its movement.
I don't know if you've ever looked at a bird flying, but it's impossible to tell the way the wing moves, for example. He could see how the wing moves and also draw it at the same time.
Leonardo dreamed of creating a machine to imitate the flight of birds, and beginning in 1495, even strapped wings on assistants and to have them attempt flight. But finding a way to power a flying machine was always a great problem.
He starts out thinking that maybe we can flap, right? And comes to realize that is really not possible. He's studying birds, but more than that, he's studying bats. And he finally comes up with the whole notion of gliding.
Leonardo also drew a machine much like our modern helicopter. But it was an idea, not an invention, and if constructed, probably would not have left the ground. Still, the range of Leonardo's technical imagination is astounding. He drew all kinds of devices in use in some form today, from parachutes to bicycles, with details that prefigure the modern versions. This crude sketch made by an assistant shows the all-important bicycle chain. His workshop in 1490 at the age of 10. The name Salai was Leonardo's nickname for him. It means limb of Satan. Despite the boy's somewhat tender age, he apparently became one of Leonardo's lovers.
Salai was a beautiful young boy that Leonardo took in his studio when he was 10, 11. And Leonardo took him probably just because he was learned a lot. So probably he posed for Leonardo, maybe more than that. We have no certainty.
Salai stayed in Leonardo's workshop. Indeed, he was one of the few chosen to travel with Leonardo for the rest of his life. Leonardo, now 50 years old, was becoming a bit restless. He began to cast about for a new patron. In 1502, the powerful Duke Cesar Borgia, sketched here by Leonardo, took him on as a military engineer. Borgia was a ruthless warrior who had set out to conquer all of central Italy, and he must have been intrigued by Leonardo's designs for all kinds of brutal war machines, including giant crossbows, a moving tank, and a primitive machine gun. One drawing is of a scythe or spinning wheel of blades.
The nature of these offensive weapons, let's call them, is rather fanciful. And one really wonders whether there were serious proposals.
Leonardo did design war machines. He did design fortifications. But that's what every engineer designed in the Renaissance.
In 1503, Leonardo returned to his old home, Florence. His reputation had been so enhanced by his years in Milan that Florence now received him with open arms. But, famous as he was, there was another, younger artist who was at center stage here. And Michelangelo did not share the limelight gladly.
Michelangelo and Leonardo were rivals, but at the same time they appreciate each other's work. Leonardo did the sketch of Michelangelo's David, and Michelangelo at the same time did a drawing of Leonardo's Battle of Anghiari.
They were so different one from the other. Leonardo was a courtman, handsome, at ease in all situations. Michelangelo was a solitary man, quite bitter already.
One day, Leonardo was asked to explain a certain passage of Dante. He saw his rival across the square and said, "Here comes Michelangelo, he can explain it to you." But Michelangelo turned and snapped, "Explain it yourself, you who made a model of a horse you could never cast in bronze and which you gave up to your shame, and the stupid people of Milan trusted you." In October 1503, when Niccolò Machiavelli was a young and powerful official in the Florentine government, Leonardo was hired to decorate the city council chamber. This would be by far the biggest commission Leonardo ever had. The mural would commemorate Florence's victory in the Battle of Anghiari. The opposite wall was to be painted by Leonardo's chief rival, Michelangelo. Leonardo worked on the project for 3 long years and then, as he had done so often before, left it unfinished. It is unknown why Leonardo stopped his work. Perhaps Michelangelo's taunt about the unfinished horse hit home. Perhaps he felt he was too old for such a rivalry.
Florence was too small for both of them. It was one or the other. They couldn't work at the same time in the same place.
The ceiling revealed a technique of etching very similar to Leonardo's drawings.
Leonardo had long been more interested in science than in painting. He became fascinated with the mechanics of the human body and took corpses into his workshop to dissect. Never a religious man, he felt no compunctions about plunging his scalpel into the dead flesh so he could systematically detail every part of the body. When he came upon a 100-year-old man in a hospital, he sat down and patiently waited for the man to die so he could dissect him to see what caused such a peaceful death. That record is history's first description of arteriosclerosis, or hardening of the arteries.
You might be deterred by the fear of living in the night hours in the company of those corpses, quartered and flayed, and horrible to see.
Leonardo's interest was purely scientific, but to others it seemed ghoulish. And besides, getting corpses was always a problem. When church officials learned of his dissections, they thought he had gone too far, and for the second time in his life, Leonardo suffered an embarrassing public accusation. This time the charge was necromancy, or worshiping the dead, and in 1514, Vatican officials halted his studies. Leonardo became morose and began a series of depictions, both visual and literary, on his vision of the end of the world, which he thought would be brought about by storms and floods. Perhaps these were the floods that had haunted him since he was a child.
Amid much weeping and wailing were men and women and children, all terror-stricken by the fury of the winds, which with tempestuous gusts were churning the waters under and over and all around, with the corpses which had met their death by drowning.
Now well over 60, Leonardo was tired. He had just endured the most frustrating period in his life. So when in 1516 the King of France invited him to join his court in the Loire Valley, Leonardo seized the opportunity. He probably knew he would never see Italy again. The king delighted in having such a brilliant mind in his midst.
Very often the king would knock at the door at any time of day or night to ask him something. And Leonardo was very pleased because, in fact, this was the dream of his life. But what's sad is that at this time Leonardo was too old to do really anything.